here at Walsh University, and once again, we're thrilled to have you. We apologize for the shifts in the schedule and some of the conclusions. We have a theology and philosophy department here on campus, and one of the great mysteries that they spend their time discussing are how airline schedules actually work, and so we're hard at work on this. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. He is an Ohioan, a true Ohioan, and we're honored to have him here actually for the second time on Walsh University's campus. Being a faith-based institution and being in Ohio, we really need to, every set of comments has to be couched in a story both about Providence and football. And sometimes Providence works in an interesting way. Ambassador Tony Hall grew up in Dayton, Ohio, was quite the athlete in high school, and was recruited by just a little college in Columbus called Ohio State University to play football there. But they also recruited another Ohio running back the same year, whose name was Paul Warfield. Paul Warfield is now in the Professional Football Hall of Fame. So Ambassador Hall decided, well, maybe Denison University would be a good place to go and play, thinking, and I don't want to comment on his football skills, but probably quite rightly, that playing time would be hard to get in the same backfield as Paul Warfield. But for whatever the results, we're certainly happy that his life took the direction that it did, because he is indeed a true leader to the hunger movement here in the United States and around the world. Following Denison University, Ambassador Tony Hall joined the Peace Corps, where he taught English in Thailand. He came back from the Peace Corps and returned to Dayton, began a political career where he served first in the Ohio State House of Representatives, the Ohio Senate, and then was elected to the U.S. Congress for the 3rd District of Ohio in 1976. He co-founded the Select Committee on Hunger in the House of Representatives, and he was the first U.S. Congressman to visit famine-ravished Ethiopia in 1984. And it's from that point on that Ambassador Tony Hall became a tireless hunger fighter, both for the hunger here in America and around the world. He's visited Ethiopia a number of times and other places around the world, addressing issues of hunger and poverty. And then in 2002, he was appointed by President George W. Bush the United States Ambassador to the UN food agencies. Following his time in the diplomatic service, he returned to the United States, where he became the executive director for the Alliance to End Hunger in Washington, D.C., where he now serves as the executive director emeritus. I want to say that as we look ahead at our nation and our future and our politics, Ambassador Hall, midterm elections are coming up. It's not too late. There's a lot of people in this room I think would be willing to go door to door for you and canvass the neighborhoods. Certainly his reputation for compassion, bipartisanship, and public service are a model that we sorely and desperately need in our political discourse today. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce, returning to Walsh University, where 4 years ago he received the Founders Award for his service to the global community, Ambassador Tony Hall.
Thank you, Douglas, and it's lovely to be here, and I want to thank all of you for being here. Whoops. That's not God calling. I know this is Walsh University, but anyway, thank you. Douglas told an interesting story. Oh, brother. He told an interesting story about my football days, and I was listening to the president, and you know, there's a lot of places you can be, and you're here. And I find that wonderfully refreshing, because I was thinking of my time when I was in high school and college, and I wouldn't have been here. I was thinking about football, and I was thinking about my life, and I wasn't thinking about hungry people. And as Mr. Palmer said, I played in this football stadium here at the Football Hall of Fame. Pro football was established here, and all of the United States was established in this town of Canton, Ohio. And I played against some of the people that are in that Hall of Fame. And I decided that after playing on this football field that maybe I wasn't as good as I thought I was. And so I got involved in a lot of different issues, and I think probably one of the things that changed my mind was after college I went into the Peace Corps, and it helped me, as some of the Peace Corps volunteers will tell you, it helped me get away from myself a little bit. It taught me a lot about life, it taught me a lot about poverty, it taught me a lot about living with the poor. I'd never been poor in my life, but I lived with the poor. I spoke a different language. I took my showers out of a bucket, and I lived under a mosquito net for a couple years, and it was an amazing experience, and it got me away from myself. It helped mature me a lot about life. And it was interesting that I learned from that, because when I went to Congress for the first time, I was put on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and as a result of that experience, I based a lot of my voting on how I looked at foreign affairs. I looked at it from the standpoint of how you would look at the United States living in another country, living in a developing nation, and I was in the country of Thailand. And I'm going back 50 years ago, because that's when I was in Thailand. So Peace Corps had a lot to do with my upbringing and my understanding of poverty. And then I was a U.S. Congressman for 24 years in Ohio. I represented an area in southwest Ohio, Dayton, Ohio, and the suburbs. And then I was a U.S. Ambassador for the UN Agencies of Food and Agriculture, and I'm now with the Alliance to End Hunger, which is a great organization in Washington, D.C. So during my career, I have truly had experiences that have shaken me and shown me a lot of things. I've had my eyes open, and I've seen hunger and a lot of suffering. And some of you heard my story yesterday. I spoke yesterday to some people that are here in the room, and back in the 1980s, when I was in Congress, I was chairman of the Select Committee on Hunger, and the Select Committee on Hunger, and it was my job to go to developing nations, especially in Africa and Asia, South America, places that were experiencing hunger, and to look at it and report back to Congress what I was seeing, and how could we help? How could we make things better? Was our food getting through? Was our messages and our programs working? And one of the first countries I went to was in Ethiopia, and I saw 25 children die one time in Ethiopia within 15 minutes. And I was up country with Mother Teresa's group. How many of you have heard of Mother Teresa? You know Mother Teresa? Put up your hand. Because I was going over with my friend, said maybe some of these young people haven't heard of Mother Teresa. Okay, so a lot of you have heard of Mother Teresa. All right. So I was with her group, and we were up country in Ethiopia, and there was this large they were having a civil war at the time. And the Civil War, as a result of things not working and people killing one another, and what happened is that people were running for their lives and people couldn't farm, and they were scattered all over the place. And Mother Teresa had a place up country where she had a little clinic about half the size of this room, and people had run towards her clinic, and it was on top of a plateau, and they thought there would be blankets and food and medicines, and there was nothing there except two nuns and two other nuns that I had brought up with me on a light plane from Addis Ababa. There were 10,000 people outside starving to death, thinking that there was going to be food and medicines and blankets and clean water. There was nothing. And these people just laid down and started to die. And mothers were handing me their dead children. They must have thought I was a doctor. They did think I was a doctor. They thought maybe if I touched them or held them or something, that I could bring them back to life. And I saw 25 children die right before my eyes. I never got over that. And that was a horrendous day. That day I also got shot at. I was in a Jeep, and we had a driver, and because of the Civil War, I had an assistant with me that traveled with me, and we got shot at, and a machine gun went over our head, and we had to dive in the ditch. My driver left. He ran. I mean, I would have ran, but I didn't know where to run to. And he ran, and so I'm in the middle of nowhere with my assistant and no driver, and machine gun fire was going over our head. I don't think they were firing at us. They were firing at something that was over our head, but anyway, we had to run, and I jumped in and drove the Jeep. And my driver was nowhere around. And then that night, we flew back. We were able to find our plane. We flew back to Addis. This is all in one day. We flew back to Addis. The ambassador to the country at the time wasn't in the country, so he gave me his house to stay there for the 3 days that I was in country. It's a big, beautiful house. I'm being served at a table like this with about 5 people from Ethiopia. They're wearing gloves, and they're serving me fried chicken and mashed potatoes and rolls and pies, and enough food that could have fed maybe 100 people. And my friend, my assistant, and I had to get up. We couldn't eat. We went to our rooms and just couldn't eat. That day, that was just one day. So for the next 2 days, it was like that. We saw people die left and right. It left a tremendous impression upon me, and coming back from that situation, I decided that this was going to be my life. I was going to spend my time working on this, traveling to countries, fighting, legislating, starting programs, and working for programs that made an impact and brought value to this issue. My constituents in Dayton, Ohio, they noticed too, and in both a positive and a negative sense, people from my district were glad to know that I was leading this charge to end poverty and hunger in the world, and they were also feeling that I was leaving them behind. My strongest supporters were saying, "Hey, Tony, we like what you're doing for the poor and the hungry. That's great, but you know, we have some issues right here at home in Dayton, Ohio, in Montgomery County. What are you doing about that?" And they were right. Dayton had a hunger problem, and and they still do. And they took the voices of my constituents. It took them to remind me of that. And this is what you have to understand. Legislators, you know, we're often confronted with a lot of issues. I mean, there'll be 20,000 issues before the Congress, before this 2-year term is up. There'll be 20,000 pieces of legislation before us. And sometimes, no matter how well intentioned they may be, the voices of everyday people are essentially shut out. The poor people, the hungry people, they don't have a voice. They don't have campaign funds. They're not necessarily the greatest voters in the world. They're not strong. They don't get in to see congressmen and senators. So who is their voice going to be? Are you going to be their voice? Because most of the voices of people that get in to see congressmen and senators, you know, they're dressed like me. They wear ties, coats. They're lobbyists. They're well paid. And there's hardly any lobbyists for poor people in Washington, D.C. So what we did is I heard from my constituents, and I focused more on the hunger issues in Dayton, and along with local businesses and government officials and religious leaders, we're able to start what we now refer to as a hunger-free community. And this coalition in Dayton was able to evaluate and address hunger needs, and we were able to actually come close to ending hunger in the community. And that's what a hunger-free community is all about. You want to get to a place where nobody will go to bed hungry ever again in your community. Could be in a city, could be in a county, could be in a rural area. And that's the goal. Where you have enough resources by collaborating, bringing your people together where nobody's going to go to bed hungry again. And so back in Congress, I worked with my colleagues on the Select Committee on Hunger to research and promote the idea of hunger-free communities across the country. And this ultimately led to the Hunger-Free Communities Network that is really coming through in local ways to end hunger in America. And this organization, my organization, called the Alliance to End Hunger, is helping a lot of these coalitions to share best practices and resources with one another, helping networks diverse in size and scope. And a lot of the success can be traced back to the voices of constituents all those years ago. Let me tell you some other stories. You know, many of you, you've heard about Mother Teresa, you heard the president talking about it, and was an inspirational figure. I've met her, and I've met her a number of times. As a matter of fact, I went to her funeral. And she does stand about 4'10". And she's not I wouldn't say she's a beautiful woman, but was a beautiful woman, but she's beautiful in so many ways. Her spirit is so strong, it's like you're overwhelmed. And she took me downtown in Calcutta, where people live on top of one another, and it was a very densely populated, and there was somebody lying in the street, and she had some of her helpers pick this man up, and he was near death, and she began to wash him off and love him and whisper in his ear, talk to him. She hugged everybody, loved everybody. She came back to me later in the day, and she said, not everybody can come to Calcutta like you. She said, but I want you to go back to America and tell everybody to do the thing that's in front of you. Do the thing that's in front of you. It's pretty simple. Do the thing that's in front of you. And she was kind of saying to me, look, if everybody took care of their neighbor, if everybody fed the person next to you, if everybody smiled upon the person that nobody smiles upon in your university, if everybody started a food pantry, if everybody did a gleaning program, if everybody helped people that smiled upon a senior citizen couple that's hurting, probably half the stuff we do in this world we wouldn't need to do through the government. Do the thing that's in front of you. And I thought that was a pretty simple message. Do the things in front of you. We are now in a time where all of us need to do what's in front of us, and it means advocating for people who have trouble speaking for themselves. We are in the process of seeing the President of the United States and the Congress thinking about cutting programs for the poor overseas and in this country. And we have 4 famines now in this world going on in Yemen and South Sudan and Somalia and Nigeria. And we got 42 million people in our country that are hungry. And the Congress, and forgetting about politics, they want to cut poverty, hunger programs. What are you going to do about it? You going to do something about it? Are you going to email your congressman? Are you going to ask to see him? Are you going to go in and talk? Are you going to write letters? Are you going to do something about it? Because it really is important, because if you don't, they are going to cut. They're talking about cutting 37 to 40% of these programs for the poor. Are you going to start thinking about having a hunger-free community program in your district? Are you going to start thinking about a gleaning program? Are you going to start a food pantry? Are you going to do a pickup of food programs? Are you going to do the things in front of you? Because I tell you, we need you. We really, really need you. I'm very worried about what's going on today. As a matter of fact, we're talking about among the anti-hunger groups in the country, among the Catholic bishops and the World Visions and the Save the Children and Bread for the World and my organization, Alliance to End Hunger, and Sojourners, both Republican and Democrat, we're talking about doing a fast, a hunger fast, prayer and fast across the country, probably a day or 2 after Easter, based on these cuts, because they're unfair. How dare these elected officials, and I'm a politician, how dare them cut poor people? That's not what our country's about. Our country's not about that. Our country should always be about helping the least of these. As Matthew 25 says, it's about helping people. It's about loving people. It's about reaching out to people. So we're thinking about doing a fast. And we're thinking about fasting and praying, because these are the 2 most important disciplines you can do. 2 strongest disciplines. You do it under God for the poor. So think about that. Think about what you're going to do. Think about what you're going to do that's right next to you. What's going on in your university? What can you do? What can you do to make things better? A reporter asked Mother Teresa, don't you think that what you do is a drop in the bucket? And she said, no. What I do is not a drop in the bucket, it's a drop in the ocean. But if I didn't do it, it'd be 1 less drop. First off, I can't believe a reporter would ask me that. But the fact is, if all of us put our drops together here in this room, we'd have something. We'd have a stream, a pond, maybe a river. Just in this room, we could make a difference. Just in this room, we could end hunger and can't. Maybe just in this room. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Thanks.